Everybody. I believe this is the third video, and we are doing a common law training manual. And I am just reading as much as I can, as fast as I can, for people that do not have time to read it. And so I believe I'm on page 28, and I'm starting on a section called a note on common law enforcement. All right, here we go. In the last video, I actually played a very pleasing video of just nice scenes. And I went back and watched it and I was completely distracted. I stopped listening altogether and just watched the beautiful scenery and lost myself. So I decided maybe that wasn't a good idea. I'm so sorry. So anyway, here we go. So it is understood that every able-bodied citizen is obligated and empowered by natural law to assist the court sheriff and his deputies in enforcing the sentence of the court, including by ensuring the imprisonment of the guilty, the monitoring of his associates, and the public seizure of the assets and property of the guilty and his agents, if such is the sentence of the court. This collective law enforcement is required in the interest of public safety, especially when the guilty party is an entire institution or head officers of that body. I was surprised the first time I read it, but then, it makes sense, of course. So, a note on appealing common law court decisions. Under the doctrine of natural law, in which every man and woman is born with an inherent grasp of right and wrong and of justice, it is understood that a jury of 12 citizens, when given the complete evidence and facts of a case, will arrive at a just and proper verdict. The truth of that verdict must stand and is not subject to reevaluation or dispute, except in the case of gross dereliction of duty or non-consideration of evidence. Therefore, the verdicts of common law court juries are not subject to appeal or revision, since the truth is not mutable or reformable. This solidity of a verdict is also required by the common law doctrine and custom of stare decisis, meaning the decision stands. Stare decisis is other cases that have come before. It's case precedent. So, meaning the decision stands. So if the same kind of case comes up, you can look back at stare decisis and you can look back at old cases and you can see a commonality or you can see a parallel, and the same decision holds true under that case precedent, whereby the precedent decisions of previous court verdicts have binding authority. Without stare decisis, the law is subject to the whims and interference of others. In the words of Black's Law Dictionary, the doctrine of stare decisis states that legal decisions are binding and shall not be reversed. The decision stands. That is, once a court has entered its judgment upon an issue, it shall not reverse itself. This is, in fact, the foundation of legality in the common law system and is one of the principal differences between common law and civil law. Convictions and verdicts. Every legal system operates according to its own worldview and essential purpose. In the case of civil or statute law, the contending interests of individuals waging war with one another in a courtroom define the process and the aims of the court. This system serves whoever has the money or influence to present the most convincing case, usually before a single magistrate who is part of a self-governing and unaccountable judicial clique. The law under this elite-derived system is a private weapon to wield against another person or group over commercial interests, not an avenue of justice for all or of the common good. In the common law, contrarily, the court is defined not by contending individual interests, but by the needs of the community as a whole, and by justice as defined by those who have suffered from the lack of it. A bedrock of collective morality shapes how the common law operates according to a simple issue. With this legal decision and precedent will this legal decision and precedent best serve the community as a whole, and those within it who are the most vulnerable or who have suffered or been victimized, or who may be? Men and women have a natural tendency to resolve their differences and mediate disputes among themselves when not coerced and left to themselves to apply their own sense of right and wrong. Despite this, the state has, under the threat of force, violently conditioned people to automatically deny their own judgment and defer to external authorities whenever they are in a dispute or they seek justice. And so long, relearning of freedom And so a long relearning of freedom is needed for common law to become a functional part of life once again. Fortunately, we have found that the very act of publicly declaring and establishing the supremacy of the people and their common law has sparked that process of relearning freedom among growing numbers of people, sparked but not secured. For the greatest impediment to the efficacy of common law courts lies in the fears and doubts that seize people when they are presented with the power to be the law and not have the law be done to them. We have been taught that taking the law into your own hands is a violation of civil order and tantamount to anarchy. In reality, for citizens to judge legal matters for themselves is the highest civic virtue and the cornerstone of true democracy. Democracy of 12. According to the Athenian lawmaker Solon, the latter even believed the citizens should be fined or reprimanded for shrinking away from a public controversy or from the responsibility to be lawgivers. The Athenian lawmaker for thinking that is wrong because we have a right to association. We have a right to associate how we wish. And as an American state national, you don't have any coercion to do anything. You can just remain a simple ASN and you are free, and that is it. To be a part of the General Assembly, you are an American state citizen and you want and you have that desire to serve and to be a part of your courts. So I'm in disagreement with the Athenian lawmaker Solon. At the heart of that personal responsibility for the law is the capacity of people to judge a lawsuit for themselves as sworn jurors and impose a verdict and a sentence in such a suit. The jury system has always been the purest expression of the common law and its capacity to empower the people themselves to defend traditional liberties and ascertain the truth of a matter. To render a fair and reasonable verdict, anyone simply needs to know all the facts and the evidence and consider it all soberly without threats, influence, or coercion. The more people who gather to determine the truth of the matter, the more likely they will come to a just and truthful verdict. It tends to be the case that individual bias or prejudice, which is always present and undeniable within a jury, becomes, through the jury process, counterbalanced and absorbed into a broader collective truth imposed by the natural reason and fairness among jury members. Enforcement. The big and thorny issue, of course, is not whether men and women can come to a court verdict, but rather how the decision can be enforced and effective in their community. This is especially an issue when the verdict is imposed against heads of church or state, or even entire institutions, as in the February 25th, 2013 verdict of the International Common Law Court of Justice, ICLCJ, concerning genocide in Canada. To use that case as an example, the moral weight of the verdict was clearly the strongest weapon in the arsenal of the court and created the conditions for the enforcement of the verdict against the 30 officials of church and state named in the indictment. For one thing, the February 25th verdict, which sentenced all the defendants to public banishment, 25 years in prison, and the loss of property and assets, directly helped depose not only Pope Benedict Joseph Ratzinger, but the most powerful Catholic cardinal in Rome, the Vatican Secretary of State, Tarcisio Berton, who also resigned while in office after the ICLCJ verdict was pronounced. Ratzinger and Berton know about international law, and even if others don't, they clearly understood that the verdict of the ICLCJ carries a recognized legitimacy under the law of nations and the public right to form tribunals of conscience when governments and courts refuse to address a matter. And the Vatican also knows that the ICLCJ verdict can be entered into other nations' courts and used for the issuing of arrest warrants against proven war criminals like church officers. And so the resignation of these ostensibly untouchable church leaders in the spring of 2013 is simple proof of the power of independent common law court verdicts. A court verdict, after all, is a binding order carrying with it the full force of the law, and whoever ignores or subverts such a verdict and the court's orders arising from it is guilty of an indictable crime. In our website, www.itcc.org, We have printed all of the court documents from the first ICLCJ case of genocide in Canada. The court order and arrest warrant dated March 5th, 2013 can be acted on by sworn agent of the ICLCJ or whoever such an agent appoints. Any citizen, in short, can arrest or assist in the arrest of Joseph Ratzinger, Tarcisio Berton, and the other officials of church and state found guilty of crimes against humanity, people. Such enforcement of the law of people themselves is generally recognized in most countries under the precedent known generically as right of citizen's arrest. In Canada, for example, under a law known as the Citizens Arrest and Self-Defense Act, 2012, citizens can detain anyone who either commits a crime or is even suspected of having done so, or who poses a threat to their own or other safety, like for other purposes, a child raping priest. The power of citizens' arrest has been broadened under this new Canadian law from what it was previously. And they give a website, http://laws, lowest justice, GCCA. I would say look at the text. It's on page 34 if you want that, and look it up. In theory, then, the enforcement of common law courts, the verdicts by any people, is not only legitimate and lawful, but it is guaranteed even under the laws of countries dominated by civil statute law. But power, as we know, is not only about laws and theory, but ultimately involves naked force, the capacity of one group to impose its will upon another. Hugh Grotius, a 16th century pioneer of international law, said that legal principles acquired power only when backed by cannon fire. So besides its legal and moral weight, what cannons will back up and enforce the verdicts of our common law courts, especially when the firepower of those we are arresting and sentencing is apparently so much greater than ours? Another great pioneer, the Chinese general Sun Tzu, wrote millennia ago that in any conflict, power is not ultimately what you have materially, but rather psychologically, and the superior firepower of a much bigger enemy can always be negated with the right unforeseen maneuvers. Those rulers indicted by the ICLCJ are people garbed by the illusory robes of their offices, and they are guarded by other men and women who, like the rulers themselves, are motivated primarily by fear. That fear is their greatest weakness and can be easily exploited by even a small group of people, as anyone who has occupied a Roman Catholic church learns very quickly. The fact that laws guard the rich and the powerful is not as important as the reality that any functional law rests upon its moral and political legitimacy. Once such legitimacy is weakened or gone, the laws and hard physical power of a state or church begin to crumble. Once public confidence in a ruler wanes, international divisions appearing in the ruling hierarchy, and usually a palace coup occurs and the regime falls. We are witnessing precisely such developments and such a collapse of legitimacy within the Roman Catholic Church today, in the manner of events prior to the deposing of any dictatorship. And so the short answer to the question, how do we enforce our verdicts in the face of the power of the enemy, is simply, we do, Sun Tzu teaches, and strike at the weakest, not the strongest part of that enemy. The weak point of any institution, especially a church, is its public image and its source of money. Threaten either, and the entire institution must respond to the smallest of enemies. We have proven that in practice, and the very fact of our smallness gives us a freedom and flexibility to strike at such big targets when and how we like, a power that is denied to big institutions. A common law court verdict like the one of February 25th, 2013, is a wedge between the credibility of an institution like the Vatican and the rest of the world. By striking at that credibility, a weak link in the church's chain, we are maneuvering around the strong points of that opponent and hitting them where they have no defense. The fact that as an organization, they officially protect and aid child rapists and human trafficking. And it was precisely through such a strategic maneuver that on August 4th, 2013, the Vatican was declared a transnational criminal body under an international law. As such a criminal body, the Vatican can now be legally disestablished, the officers arrested, and its property and wealth seized, not simply under common law, but according to the law of nations. See the United Nations Convention Against Transnational organized crime, November 2000, Articles 5, 6, and 12. And they give another website, page 36. So while it isn't normally possible to immediately detain heads of states or corporations after a sentence is passed against them, such an arrest does follow naturally as the credibility and protection diminishes. Their overt power tends to crumble as the law and public condemnation works around their strong defenses and undermines them like water flowing around a wall or a rock. The point of any common law court verdict, after all, is not to target or imprison mere individuals, but to stop any threat to the helpless and to the community, to arrest such threats so they do not reoccur, primarily by ending the institutional source of those threats. And our chief means to do so is the moral weight of our evidence and verdicts combined with the capacity of many people to enforce those verdicts. Common law sheriffs and peace officers. I think I'll read a few more pages and then this video will probably be long enough. That brings us to a key aspect of the court, its police arm, without which it cannot function. The tradition of common law sheriffs is an old one in the English-speaking world. Men or women appointed from the local community to detain those harming others, bring them into town or shire courts for judgment, and enforce that court sentence. In the United States, that tradition is still alive and embodied in locally elected sheriffs who are granted considerable power within their communities. The role of the common law court sheriff is foretold to provide security for the court, to deliver court summonses and orders, and orders to appear, to detain and physically deliver the court, those summoned who evade a court order, and to enforce the final sentence of the court, including by jailing and monitoring of the guilty. The sheriff does not perform these duties alone, but with deputies and other agents he appoints to assist him, such as a posse is another pejorative term that actually refers to an important traditional custom of mobilizing all the able-bodied men in a community to stop anyone who has committed a crime. A lot of times they're not using the word posse anymore, they're using sheriff's reserves. The word posse comes from the Latin term pro toto posse suo, meaning to do the utmost to one's power. According to one writer, all persons who were the victims of a crime in Anglo-Saxon England were expected to raise their hue and cry and apprehend the criminal. And upon hearing their cry, every able-bodied man in the community was expected to do the utmost in his power to chase and apprehend the accused. I could really see that being misused, with a horde of people, in a rage. So I don't know. That's kind of questionable. The custom of electing community peace officers like sheriffs, in other words, arose from the belief that everyone in a community had the obligation to police and protect themselves and their children, rightly so. The court sheriff is thereby the servant of the people, taken from among them, answerable to and recallable by them, and not an external force over them. Part of the power of such a sheriff is that he can deputize anyone to assist him, including other police officers and agents of the very institutions being named and tried in common law courts. This is an especially important tactic and action during the early stages of the development of our common law courts, since it uses the very strength of the system we are opposing against itself. To give an example, if a common law court summons or arrest warrant is to be delivered against a church or government official, the court sheriff will first deliver a copy of it to the local existing police agency, along with a deputizing notice placing those police under the jurisdiction of the common law. See court documents in Appendix 4. As such, the police are then obligated to assist the sheriff and must take the same oath of common law office as the sheriff. If those issued such a notice deny or dispute it or refuse to take the oath, they are then ordered to stand down from their position and not interfere with the sheriff in his duties. If they agree with the notice, either directly or through their silence, their acquiescence, or non-interference, such police agencies are tacitly abiding by the common law action, and the normal protection around criminals in high office is suddenly nullified. We should not underestimate the revolutionary consequences of such nullifications, mainly that the shield around the powerful is suddenly gone. Such a remarkable encounter is in effect an enormous tug of war between two contending legal systems, a battle of wills played out in full public view as an enormous teaching moment. Our aim is to create and encourage such a creative confrontation and moral conflict at every level of official society. This is the bigger and crucial point of such a confrontation between court sheriffs and civil law policemen, a clash that must always be visible and televised to the world as it occurs. For this brings with it a chance for the people to learn directly that these policemen and soldiers who provide the muscle for the system are not exempt from the authority of common law and must ultimately make a choice concerning who they are and what they serve. The moral and social impact of publicly posing such a question is inestimable.